Okay, so the Hangout's on air. Um, Welcome anybody who wants to watch this. This will be interesting. I think you'll find it interesting if you're interested in subjects relating to worldviews, to the Earth, evolution, creation, all that sort of stuff. Um, this is NephilimFree. I have a guest. His name, he goes by Rabbid Sith, and he and I are going to be debating the age of the Earth. Of course, I hold to a young Earth creation position, and my opponent holds to that the Earth is of vast geological age. And so, without further ado, we're going to go back and forth. We have a timer, and we're just going to each one present our arguments and ask each other questions. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to my opponent, and I'll start the timer now. The floor is yours, my friend.
All right, let's start now. Okay, so I entitled this presentation "The Failure of Young Earth Creationism," an explanation as to why I do not find young Earth creationism convincing. Why I disagree, I posit that young Earth creationism cannot account for the plethora of well-known and established physics and other phenomena which contradicts the ages given by young Earth creationism. I also posit that there are three main unsolvable problems for young Earth creationists. The first one being thermodynamics, the second one being the starlight problem, which I will start with, and then the formation of certain geological features. Other problems, there's also another number of miscellaneous problems that young Earth creationism cannot solve. The first being the coccolithophore growth during the Noachian flood, and the second one being the deposition of calcareous ooze during the flood, and the third being meteor impacts on other bodies and its relation to the Earth. All right, so I'm beginning with the starlight problem. The observable universe is billions of light years across. However, according to young Earth creationism, the universe cannot be older than approximately 6,000 years. If the universe is billions of light years across and the speed of light is constant, then this represents an irreconcilable problem for young Earth creationists. Why creationists cannot solve this problem? One, the speed of light is constant. Two, there are real-world consequences to the speed of light changing which are not observable. Three, other alternative solutions have either unsolvable problems or have no experimental evidence supporting them. The speed of light is constant. The speed of light has never been observed to vary outside of its bands of uncertainty, though through Michelson-Morley type experiments and optical oscillator experiments, we can be certain of the isotropy of C to 1 part in 10 to the minus 17. If the speed of light were not constant, then everything we would know about physics would have to be wrong. Again, consequences. So the first argument that creationists use, I will be citing something known as C decay. A young Earth creationist researcher by the name of Barry Setterfield proposed C decay to solve the starlight problem. Setterfield's C decay is impossible for two primary reasons. C decay conflicts with observations of supernovae and millisecond pulsars. C decay is an associated thermodynamic problem. Furthermore, there does not appear to be any decay when subjected to objective scrutiny, and the Institute of Creation Research even acknowledges this. I don't know if I can even display this, but I have a graph here and a quote from the Institution of Creation Research. Though an objective analysis of the data does not reveal any overall decay trend, the one-sidedness of the data before 1800 seems odd in this regard. There are some peculiarities in Norman and Setterfield's selection of the data which the reader needs to be aware of. This is from the Institute of Creation Research.org article. Has the speed of light decayed? If an objective analysis of the data does not reveal an overall decay trend, then why should we be concerned about such peculiarities? If the one-sidedness of the data prior to 1880 can be perfectly explained as the one-sidedness of the data prior to 1800 can be perfectly explained as errors due to primitive methods and experimental bias. The ICR article goes on to explain that, quote, edited for grammar, single anomalous point is responsible for most of the apparent 38 kilometers per second per year decay, which they report. Furthermore, Romer's uncorrected C determination would graph the line at minus 24% more than offsetting the incorrected Cassini value. If most of Setterfield's research on this matter can be explained by an anomalous data point, then why should we take the remainder seriously? Furthermore, why should we take this anomalous data point as an indication that all of physics is wrong? And I will turn over the remainder of the time to Nephi to respond to that and ask me questions.
Okay. Setting the timer. Starting now. Okay, so the crux of your argument was based on the size of the universe and the light distance problem.
Yep.
I think Barry Setterfield has provided a pretty interesting answer to that. I think the best answer to that is provided by Russell Humphreys. Russell Humphreys is a geophysicist who worked for Sandia National Laboratories for quite a few years and was, in fact, the director of that organization. Before the any of the Cassini probes or anything else out there actually was able to measure the magnetic field of any of the planets in our solar system, he predicted on a young Earth creation model what the magnetic field of each planet in our solar system would be. NASA proved him right about every single one of them. Those magnetic fields line up with the Earth being young. In fact, everything in the solar system being young. They cannot have the magnetic field they do and be of billions of years age. So the first problem that we have is I'm going to provide several lines of evidence for a young Earth. Firstly, cosmological evidence, geological evidence, historical evidence, and genetic evidence. All four of these lines of evidence to verify for us the Earth cannot be at vast age. Now, let me share the screen with you. I want to show you something. So here, let's see. There. The first problem with the idea of the, let me say this about the light distance problem. It's not solvable by creationists, nor is it truly solvable by the uniformitarian camp. It's a problem for both camps. I think the best potential solution to it is put forth by Barry Setterfield, which posits that time dilation explains the age of the universe. The galaxy can be billions of years old where it is, and the Earth only 6,000 years old where it is, both true at the same time. However, you've got as great a problem, secularists don't like to talk about it, many don't know it, but they've got as much a problem with the age of the universe as the young Earth creationists do. And the biggest problem that's so glaring is the horizon problem. And it has not been solved. Still considered a problem in astronomy because it can't be solved. It probably never will be solved. If you look at the screen here, you'll see that, look in the middle of this circle, this illustration I made. Imagine that's the singularity where the Big Bang exploded from. And the universe is expanding in all directions out from that. And I understand the secular model says there is no center of the universe, but there has to be. But that's a nonsense idea. But nonetheless, when you go out to the furthest reaches of the universe, what's observable out there, the farthest things we can detect, the universe is said to be 15 billion years old. So the distance from this any center of the universe to that distance is 15 billion years, according to the speed of light. How long light has been traveling for 15 billion years. The problem is when you traverse from one out point in space along the edge of the universe to another, you have vastly more than 15 billion years of time needed for that light to get there. The problem is the cosmic background radiation is nearly perfectly homogeneous. Now, heat cannot disperse faster than the speed of light. So this is an unsolvable issue for the uniformitarianist who believes the universe is 15 billion years old. It can't be 15 billion years old according to their own thinking. It has to be at least 100 billion years old. So their idea is off by an order of magnitude in time because heat can't disperse faster than the speed of light. So the cosmic background radiation, the heat can't have traveled these great distances to have become so evenly homogeneous in merely, and I say tongue-in-cheek, merely 15 billion years. So the cosmic background radiation problem is a real true one, and it's a very great problem for the secular theory. See, the light distance problem is not solvable by either camps. Uniformitarians want you to believe that it's solvable according to their theories. but it's not. Neither one of us can. Now, cosmic inflation is another great problem for their ideas, because cosmic these are the problems with cosmic background inflation. The background radiation is too homogeneous, unknown, and counterintuitive energy source. It contradicts the laws of physics because nothing can move faster than the speed of light. That's the known speed limit of the universe, but their idea posits it had to have. And the flatness of the universe, called omega, cannot be answered for with their theories. Secular scientists are scratching their heads to this day. How is it possible the universe is so quote unquote flat? And that's my time. Over to you.
All right, one sec. Let me start this. Okay, well, let me address the first thing that you said regarding the starlight problem. So I will go into cosmic expansion. Now, from Hubble's law, we can actually determine that the universe has been expanding. Now, as for your horizon problem, Nephi, there's actually a simple solution to that. You see, it is the problem with your speed of light argument is that there is actually something that has no such constraints on its speed, and that is the creation of space. Rather, the expansion of space actually does not have to follow the speed of light. It's now, I'm not terribly certain the exact explanation for that. Scientists use the energy source provided for that is dark energy, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and that is a pressure gradient which provides for the energy for the expansion. So the reason why we can see such a vast expanses of space is because the universe has been expanding for 13.8 billion years now. Actually, oddly enough, the number itself, 13.8 billion years, is actually given by the rate of expansion. So, I mean, that's from taking Hubble's law and counting backwards. Now, the problem with this is that if that's not the case, then yeah, I mean, I see no reason as to why that would mean that the universe is anything more than billions of years old. Many billions of years old than we thought it was. Now, the problem that I have with you, Nephi, is this. At this point, if you can't solve the starlight problem, you have done nothing to say, have done nothing to show that the explanation given by the uniformitarian model is wrong. And so, you have not shown that the Earth is young. And the problem with that is that if the Earth is not young, then, and the universe appears to be hundreds of billions of years old, then that only compounds the problem for you. At this point, it would be a very short debate indeed if you don't have an answer for that. Now, I want to go into the time dilation explanation given. I actually have a presentation on this. So Dr. Russell Humphreys claims that time dilation could be a solution to the starlight problem. However, the problem with this is that this, I was looking this up, and it seems to be called white hole cosmology. It is not unique and does not offer significant advantages over other more established and better supported cosmologies. One of the things that he claims is described by it is the Pioneer Anomaly. However, there is a paper entitled Support for Thermal Origins of the Pioneer Anomaly, and demonstrates that the Pioneer Anomaly is consistent with the known laws of physics. The paper states that it is unlikely that reanalysis will alter the main conclusion. As far as I can tell, Russell Humphreys also invokes the luminiferous aether when quoting Einstein to describe his cosmology. And the third thing is that white holes have never been observed to exist in nature. So there's a lack of experimental evidence. Again, Nephi, if there's no evidence to support this, again, the magnetic field phenomena is perfectly explained by modern cosmology. And the problem with that is that if it offers no greater explanation than modern theories, then it should be taken as ad hoc and therefore not seriously. In terms of the age of the universe, if If Nephi cannot show that the starlight problem is solvable by creationism, then he must concede my point that the Earth is billions of years old, as the account in Genesis said that the heavens and the earth were created within several days of each other, and therefore they must be of the same age. So that would simply put the problem further, that being that from observable reality, in science, we do not take the approach of assuming the conclusion first. We take the conclusion later, and the conclusion to that seems to be that both the Earth and the universe, from Nephi's own admission, must be hundreds of billions of years old, and not the contrary, and that current theories of physics should account for that. Now, as uniformitarian, I don't necessarily believe that the Earth is hundreds of billions of years old, but we can debate that. All right, thank you. That's my time.
Okay, so I'll respond to that. You stated that these issues have been solved and they're explainable. That's not so. For example, referring to the cosmic inflation problem, and it is a problem, George Estafio, director of the Kavli Institute for Cosmology at the University of Cambridge, professor of astrophysics at Cambridge, stated in a Google Hangout titled Looking Back in Time, Oldest Light Offers Insight to the Universe. He states this, and I quote him directly: "This scalar field permeates all of spaces and is responsible for causing space to expand faster than the speed of light. That's why it's called a cartoon of a theory, because we don't understand how inflation works at any fundamental sense." On top of that, he also stated, "We don't yet understand the fundamental physics that drove inflation. We certainly don't understand the details of how it worked. The simplest model of inflation requires that the early universe contained what is called a scalar field. That field permeates all the space and is responsible for causing the universe to expand faster than light." So he's admitting that he believes something for which the scientists acknowledge there is no evidence. The famous astronomer, astrophysicist Arno Penzias has addressed this as also. Anna Injas, Paul Steinert, and Abraham Loeb published a paper in which they state, "Inflation requires that the universe be filled with a high density of gravitational self-repels, thereby enhancing the expansion and causing it to speed up. Important to note, however, that this is a critical ingredient referred to as inflationary energy and is purely hypothetical. We have no direct evidence that it exists." Now, James Gantz, science writer, former scientist, said in Which Way to the Big Bang, published in Science 1999, said, "Even so, there is no proof that cosmic inflation is correct, and to add to uncertainty, distinct versions of the theory have proliferated as physicists grapple with the problem of finding an inflation that could have produced the universe, but is also compatible with the known laws of physics." You see, because it contradicts the laws of physics that anything can move faster than the speed of light. And inflation, cosmic inflation, requires that it did move vastly faster, many times the speed of light. But that contradicts the laws of science. So we could envision a supernatural creator be able to contradict the laws of physics, but it's not rational nor scientific to put forth a scientific theory that contradicts the laws of physics and then claim it's true. That's unscientific. Peter Cole said, "But then nobody even knows whether cosmic inflation happened anyway," in 1998 in Nature, the most prestigious science journal in the world. So cosmic inflation has not been proven. It has no scientific evidence that supports it. It's purely hypothetical. Now, when it comes to the light distance problem, as I've said, neither one of us can solve the problem. I can imagine a supernatural creator being able to do whatever he wishes with his creation. He could expand the universe vastly faster than the speed of light. But then we're talking about someone who has all power. But by the laws of physics, it cannot have happened that way, because the speed limit for the universe is the speed of light. Any theory which posits matter expanded vastly faster than the speed of light contradicts the laws of physics, and it has no supporting evidence. Now, here's some cosmological evidence the Earth is young. The magnetic field of the Earth has been repeatedly measured since 1829. It's been discovered that it has a half-life of approximately 1,400 years. If we go back in time, the Earth just 20 million years ago would have had the cosmic field of that equal to a cosmic star. Under those conditions, many of the molecules necessary for life couldn't even form. If, for example, you could pop yourself onto an Earth that had the magnetic field of a magnetic star 20 million years ago, instantaneously, every molecule or every atom of metal, manganese, iron, potassium, everything in your body would instantly snap out of your body into the core of that planet. Boom, gone. And you would fall dead. In fact, your cells would explode. So it's not possible that life has existed on the Earth 20 million years ago, because the magnetic field of the Earth is reducing at a rate so great that we can know the Earth's age cannot be millions of years of age. The moon's recession from the Earth, do the mathematics for it, and I understand it's increasing. 1.2 billion years ago, the moon would have been touching the Earth. That can't be so. The planets, the Earth and Moon would have ripped each other to pieces. So I'm just beginning. I have much evidence that the Earth cannot be billions of years old. And my time is up. It's over to you.
All right. Okay. So just give me one moment. Sorry. Hold on. Let me just reset this. Okay. So the first thing that I want to discuss, Nephi, is I think that you didn't necessarily understand the first. Or rather, excuse me, the second half of my my argument in regards to the starlight problem. If there was no cosmic inflation, if the universe did not expand, then the problem with that is that you must conclude that the universe is even older than it appears. So, I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge to you, Nephi, that the universe is hundreds of billions of years old. That doesn't contradict what I believe in any way, shape, or form. Now, in regards to what you said about the magnetic field, Nephi, the Earth's magnetic field is decreasing. However, the Earth's magnetic field is also in flux, and I think that everyone has heard on the news at some point or another that we are due for a pole shift at some time. And in fact, if you look at the various radiation anomalies over the Atlantic, you can actually see the shifting of the Earth's magnetic field as the Earth's magnetic field experiences this pole shift, which again has been confirmed countless times by the shifting of the Earth's polarity can be readily observed by the the observations of various magnetic materials inside of geological formations near the plates that separate the tectonic plates, that boundaries that separate the continents. Now, in regards to that, Nephi, yeah, I mean, if we take a purely uniformitarian approach and do not take into account the fact that the magnetic field of the Earth is in flux over time, sure, that doesn't mean that the Earth would be young. However, the problem with that is that that's not the case, and in fact, actually, we will when the poles shift, that will actually lead to an increase in field strength. And this is very observable by looking at the distribution of magnetic materials near the plates. Now, in regards to what you said about moon recession, I find that to be very, very interesting. Because you see, as it turns out, there is Darwin's son actually made the argument of a fission theory. Now, again, I'm not going to defend that. However, all that does is simply, even if true, Nephi, even if true, all that would do is simply, all that would do is simply put a lower age limit on the Earth, and that would be on the order of millions of years, not the many thousands of years required for young Earth creationism. Now, here's the interesting thing about that variation in force, that the tidal recession of the moon is actually due to a tidal gradient. So effectively, the moon is draining energy away from the Earth. Why are we assuming, Nephi, that current rates hold? Why are we assuming that it is a linear? Why are we assuming that the rate of a recession is linear as opposed to an exponential decay? I'll turn the time over to you, Nephi, as I have nothing more to say on the matter.
Okay. Let me start the timer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the problem is that What secular scientists do, and they always do, is they find an anomaly that doesn't fit uniformitarianism, such as the rate of the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, and then posit, well, it's in fluctuation. A fluctuation fits it. But there's just no evidence that the Earth's magnetic field is fluctuating so great that it would be decaying at such a rate. A fluctuation would yield a rate of decay as so great as that would mean that the Earth's magnetic field is fluctuating so great that it would have a tremendous effect on life. How in the world can life be billions of years old and the Earth's magnetic field be fluctuating so great as that? It's just an ad hoc assertion. Whenever evolutionists come up with or discover something that contradicts their theory, they envision another theory and plug it into the previous one to try to fix the problem. That's all they're doing. So now let me show you this. Another evidence that the Earth cannot be billions of years old is this. According to this science paper you're looking at, I'll show it to you in a moment, 80,000 acres of coastal wetlands disappear from the continents every single year. Status and trends of wetlands in the coastal watersheds of the eastern United States, 1998 to 2004. This is actually a scientific article, and written in conjunction with NOAA. Right there, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Marine Fisheries Service. Okay, 80,000 acres. Now, at that rate, of course, there would be no continents in 20 million years. No continents whatsoever. Okay, and on top of that, the erosion rates of they're just way too fast for the Earth to be billions of years old. It can't be so. For example, in Texas, according to the government of Texas scientific survey they commissioned, Texas is losing 386 miles of its coast, or retreating at a rate of 4.1 feet per year. Now, if you do the mathematics, 4.1 feet per year, I did the mathematics on this. That's in some locations it's 6 feet, in some it's even 30. So that would be 4.1 million feet in 10 million years, which is 776 miles in 10 million years, which is 1/4 the width of the United States in 10 million years. So it's just not plausible to believe that the continents have been around for millions and upon millions of years, when scientists actually are able to measure the rate at which the continents are being eaten up by the oceans. At that rate, in only 20 million years, there would be no continents. The Earth would be a ball of water. Now, the problem for the uniformitarianist is this. To fix this problem, well, there is no fix for this problem, you see, because the only way somebody could fix this problem and still hang on to uniformitarianism is to believe that for some reason the oceans of the Earth were placid and still like a calm lake for the vast history of the Earth, and then for some reason they became slushy and began eating at the continents and having waves. Now, that's not plausible. Obviously, that can't be true. The Earth is geologically very active. The oceans have always been sloshing around and beating at the seas, at the coasts, all the time. However long the continents have been there, that's what the oceans have been doing. It makes no sense whatsoever to believe the oceans have been still and calm like a flathead lake or something for the vast history of the Earth, and then only within the last couple of million years they began to churn and have waves. So this just makes it impossible for the continents to have been around for 25 million years. 280 billion tons of coastal material is eroded into the oceans annually. 20 billion of that is believed to be subducting on the ocean floor, one plate under the other. The rest of it is just material around the edges of the continents that's just simply being lost to the sea every year. At the rate of 260 billion tons annually, there would be no continents in 20 million years. None. Now, also, the amount of sediments on the bottom of the ocean has been measured by geophysicists, and there's only 12 million years worth of erosion, if you believe uniformitarianism. 12 million years worth of erosion on the ocean floors. Why isn't there hundreds of millions worth? So I have two questions for you. If the universe has been expanding for 15 billion years, why is cosmic background radiation so homogeneous? And how can cosmic inflation violate the laws of physics by moving faster than the speed of the of light? And also, how can the continents be a vast age when in only 20 million years, at the current rate of erosion, there would be no continents in 20 million years? Now I'll start the timer for you.
Okay, sorry, hold on one second. Now, in regards to your last question regarding the speed of light and the homogeneity of the universe, and the homogeneity of the universe, well, the Big Bang actually, yeah, it does predict an isotropic universe. That is actually one of the key things that is pointed out by the Big Bang, in that it is isotropic and homogeneous. In regards to what you said, about sorry. Yes, in regards to what you said regarding the magnetic field, well, yeah, I mean, it's not ad hoc. There's a lot of evidence for the magnetic field being in flux. Again, Nephi, you ignored what I said about the direction of magnetic materials near the plate boundaries. This is the smoking gun for the flux of the magnetic field. Now, in regards to what you said about the speed of light, Nephi, that's only true if an object accelerates. There is no an object cannot accelerate faster than the speed of light, because if it does so, then its velocity becomes non-real, rather. It becomes imaginary. Now, if space itself expands faster than light, there's absolutely no problem with this. Now, other things that can potentially, well, I mean, yeah, like the and as far as things go, Nif, yeah, again, I fail to see, even if cosmic inflation did not occur, Nif, even if that didn't occur, you haven't disproved the idea of a young Earth. In fact, you just doomed yourself further. All that would mean is that the Earth is much older than it. The universe is much older than it appears, and that is not an ad hoc explanation. That is the conclusion drawn from it if the Big Bang is false. Now, I want to address what you said about the continents. Such a claim only focuses on one side of the equation. The main reason why the claim is on your claim about the continents being destroyed is unfounded is because it fails to acknowledge all the factors that built the continents up. In other words, the process upon which the clock is built is reversible. To expand this, you must, in order for you to even make this claim, Nephi, you must refuse to acknowledge the consequences of lava flows, delta and continental shelf buildup, and uplift from colliding tectonic plates. This rate of buildup occurs at rates roughly equal to, or in some cases exceeding, the erosion rate. My source for this is Ross Hugh 2004, Matter of Days, Colorado Spring, Knob Press 186 through 187. That's page, 186 to 187. No, in regards to what you said about the ocean floor, that's outside my area of expertise, Nephi. I cannot account for why there is a supposed lack of erosion. I know very little about the mechanics of the deep sea, and I will profess my ignorance of that. However, again, Nephi, I would like to point out that the starlight problem is still there, and it is a smoking gun. It's a refutation of your argument by your own by the internal logic of creationism. If you can't solve the starlight problem, and again, if you cannot give a reason why the Earth must be, or excuse me, rather the entire universe must be several thousand years old as opposed to hundreds of billions. Now, I'm happy to acknowledge that it's hundreds of billions, Nephi. I have no problem with the universe being vastly older than the Big Bang Theory predicts. Now, if you're not going to acknowledge that, the cosmic inflation, then yeah, you've doomed yourself further. There's no reason to believe that the Earth is young. And in fact, from creationism's own internal logic, the Earth itself must be hundreds of billions of years old if you cannot solve the starlight problem. So again, Nephi, all of the problems that you just mentioned, if true, are a worse problem for young Earth creationists than for me. And that ends my time. Thank you. Hello?
Okay, there you go. I started the timer. Okay, so all you did was admit that cosmic inflation has not been solved, and it's a smoking gun for both our worldviews. I'm sorry, but it discredits your idea of a naturalistic formation of the universe in 15 billion years, and it refutes my idea that a naturalistic formation of the world could occur in 6,000,000 years. But I don't posit that a natural formation of the earth took place in 6,000 years. I believe an almighty God was able to do it, what physics can't do. So I do have a rational fix for it, and the secular camp has none. So now, when it comes to erosion rates, the erosion rate is a tremendous killer for the uniformitarianist idea. And let me just show you an example of why we know that's true. If you look at this photograph, you'll see that in 2013, this staircase, that's what it looked like in 2013. Here it is in 2017. Several feet more of that coast are gone in just 4 years. Now, the amount of sediments on top of mountains and islands discredits uniformitarianism as well. As you can see from this photograph, there's plenty of sediments, soil on top of this mountain, of this volcano in the sea. And on here, you see it. Look at all the grass growing on what? It's not growing on rock, it's growing on soil. Here again, lots of soil on top of the mountains of the earth, all over them, all over the earth. Now, here's the problem. If those mountains were tens to hundreds of millions of years old, at the known rates of erosion, there could be no sediments still on top of any mountain on the planet. In fact, there would be no mountains. So, I mean, but let me just give it the easiest solution to it. No sediments. There can't be sediments still hanging around on the top of mountains. The Noahic flood can explain that. If the mountains only rose out of the sea just a few thousand years ago, they would still have sediment on top of them, many feet of soil where grass could grow. But if those mountains have been there for 20 or for 40, 80, 120, 240, 450 million years, there could be no sediment on top. There would be bare rock and gravel caused by erosion, but there wouldn't be multiple feet of soil on top of the mountains of the earth. It's impossible. This by itself kills the idea that the earth is billions of years old, because it refutes the idea that the mountains of the earth are many, many millions of years old. They can't even be 1 million years old. There would be no soil on the top of any mountain on the earth. It's not possible. So just to give you an idea how fast the continents are eroding, here's a photograph of a road from January the 2nd, January the 20th, and January 24th during 1 year. Numerous feet of material have eroded. The whole road is going off into the ocean. Now, we see this kind of thing all over the earth, everywhere we look. The continents are just being eroded quickly into the seas. At these erosion rates, it's not possible for the continents to be millions of years old. The mathematics disproves it, and math doesn't lie. So the continents cannot be millions of years old. If the continents and mountains of the earth are not millions of years old, uniformitarianism is false, and the earth is young. So here's another evidence that the earth is not millions of years old. Water gaps is a powerful evidence. Water gap is a place where a river has literally eaten itself right through a mountain. Eaten right through a mountain. Now, there are many of these, and the problem for the uniformitarians is this. Mountains are solid rock for the most part, and water just takes the path of least resistance. If a river was to form and run straight into the side of a mountain, it would not eat its way right through the middle of the mountain. It would flow to the side and go around the mountain at the path of least resistance. So whenever we see a water gap, which is a river eating right through the middle of a mountain, we know that that mountain was not rock when that river ate its way through it. In fact, the water that flowed into that mountain and caused it to eat its way through had to have been long-standing and very fast. In other words, a torrent of water moving at maybe close to 100 or more miles per hour after the end of the Noahic flood slammed into that mountain, flowed off to the sides as it was barreling into the middle of the mountain, constantly eating and eating and eating away at the mountain until it ate right through it. Now, it couldn't have done that if that mountain was solid rock at the time. It could have only done it if it was soft sediments recently deposited by the Noahic flood, and that's why it was able to eat right through the middle of a mountain. So water gaps discredit the age of the mountains being millions of years old, and discredit the age of the earth being millions also. And my time is up, and I'll start the timer for you.
All right. Well, first and foremost, let me go into a bit of a straw man that I think that you have. I'm not defending the Big Bang, Nephi. I'm just defending the idea that the Earth is millions of years old. So yeah, sure. I mean, Nephi, I will, for the sake of the argument, abandon the just because it's easier for me. I'll abandon the the idea of cosmic inflation. Simply say, sure, the universe is, if we look at starlight, must be hundreds of billions of years old, Nephi. I'll freely admit that excuse me, the cosmic inflation part of the Big Bang due to the starlight yes, I'll admit, because I don't have an explanation for you for cosmic inflation. Sure, I'll admit to you, Nephi, that the universe is hundreds of billions of years old and that cosmic inflation did not occur. Now, again, the Big Bang still, again, I think that you can still have a gradual expansion over that time, and that would also solve the starlight problem, because there would be time for light to filter in. But in regards to that, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dogmatically hold to the idea that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. I'm more than happy to admit that it is many times older. Now, again, Nephi, in regards to what you said about the continents, this is assuming that the land formations do not change. And Nephi, the erosion rates, as I've said, are not a problem for me, because new land is being formed as land is being destroyed. And so I see no reason as to why that refutes the idea of the old Earth. I see no reasons to why the destruction of older geological formations and the creation of new ones over vast expanses of time is in any way contradictory to the uniformitarian model. Now, in regards to what you said about water gaps, I'm not a geologist. I can't explain to you why these occur. Yes, no, again, I don't necessarily know why that is the case. I cannot account for that, but I would imagine that if I was a geologist, I might be able to. Now, in regards to the, I mean, again, in regards to, what is it? Hold on, let's see. Let me check my notes here. I do want to bring up something there, Nephi, since I think that I've addressed what you've said there. I want to bring up something that I don't think that you can account for. Oh, actually, hold on, let me address your soil thing. Nephi, erosion first forms gravel and rock, but I think that you need to look up soil formation, plant life. You showed plenty of images of the plant life covering the tops of those mountains. Well, as it turns out, roots are a fantastic way to keep soil from being eroded. And in fact, actually, if you look at the Dust Bowl in the early 20th century, that was what happened when there were no grasses in a section of land. So I would imagine, Nephi, that the grasses on top of that mountain would be probably the reason for grasses and lichens and other such things, probably would be one of the reasons for why there is soil up there. Now, in regards to something that I want to bring up, there you have another problem, which is meteors. Now, if you look at the Chicxulub crater, that formation must have formed at the very tail end of the flood. And if you look at all the other planets, they're pockmarked by massive impact craters. Where did those craters come from? I refuse to acknowledge, Nephi, that these were somehow created in that way. They're clear evidence of a horrendous bombardment early in its history. Now, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, some of the larger impact craters on the moon would have vaporized all life, would have killed all life on this planet, coating the entire atmosphere with rock vapor and other foul gases that would be expelled from the interior and would have heated the Earth to the temperature of an oven. So if we're really going to go into the age of the Earth, why is it, if according to the young Earth theory, there isn't enough time for these large craters to erode, so why isn't the Earth covered in massive impact craters? And that ends my time. Thank you.
I would say the Earth is not covered with massive impact craters because God created it and he knows what he's doing. However, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned roots keep soil, but the erosion rate is, roots don't keep all soil. And the grass would have had to have formed immediately to keep the soil. So that does not answer for why mountains have sediments on them. It would take who knows how long for grass to migrate there and then start. And once it did, it would only hold so much. In fact, the grass itself would simply die because the soil is being depleted. So that doesn't answer for the problem. Now you mentioned the Dust Bowl. Well, that's an occurrence, a rapid occurrence. That doesn't support uniformitarianism. That does the opposite. You pointed to a catastrophic event, not one that is something that takes place over a vast age of time. So that was kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Now, the Chicxulub crater is likely not actually a crater. It's likely a blob of gas volcanic eruption that came up out of the geologically active Earth and created what it looks like an impact crater. It couldn't have been a crater that size created by an asteroid with any life on the planet, else there would be no life on the planet. So that's it. Likely there are plenty of these much smaller ones where geologists acknowledge that a massive blob of hot gas and molten lava and mud and rock boiling hot can bloop out of the Earth and created a big splatter and made a hole in the Earth that looks like an impact crater. That's what Chicxulub crater likely is. So now let me share something with you about what I was showing you before. As I spoke about the erosion rate, here's from the Texas General Land Office, and according to that study they conducted, 367 miles of Texas coast is eroding at a rate of 4.1 feet per year. So I just wanted to show you this because I don't make up stuff. This is results of a scientific study. Okay, that at this rate there could be no continents in 20 million years. Impossible. Now here's a water gap. This is a water gap in the I believe near the Appalachian Mountains. It's a famous mountain. I've forgotten the name of it. This is a water gap. It's a river that ate its way right down through a mountain. As you can see, there's much lower lying areas way out to the past in the distance, and on the other side of the mountain as well. Why would a river, therefore, how would it be possible for a river to eat through a solid rock mountain, taking a path of least resistance and go right through a mountain? It's not possible. See, there's only one way this river could have done this. This mountain, which you're the viewer of the one who took the photograph, is standing on the other side of the mountain where the river has eaten it through. Firstly, look how wide the gap at top. The gap is massive, and it gets smaller going down to the river. That means when this massive sheet of water that was moving on the Earth at high speed left over as the continents, the waters abated the continents at the end of the Noahic flood, this huge sheet of water, hundreds and hundreds of miles, perhaps a mile and a half wide, comes rushing straight towards a soft sedimentary mountain that was recently uplifted and still soft and moist all the way through. That fast-moving sheet of water literally ate right through the mountain, and as the water depleted, it ate and slower, deeper, 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 and to a thinner and thinner and thinner channel, leaving the river we see today. There is no answer for this in uniformitarianism. It can only be explained by the Noahic flood. It proves a couple of things. The mountain was soft sedimentary material when that sheet of water hit it and kept going and going until it ate right through the mountain. The mountain could not have been solid rock. Therefore, the mountain is not millions of years old. Catastrophic event explains why there are water gaps on the Earth, and uniformitarianism is false. I've got 40 seconds left, but I'll give it over to you. Pretty much.
All right. Well, in regards to what you said about the water gaps, I've actually been looking this up as you've been talking, and as it turns out, so the explanation that I would give for that is that it's likely older than the current topography. The likely occurrence is that the river established its course when the landform was at a lower elevation, or by rift in the portion of the earth of the crust having a very low stream gradient and a thick layer of unconsolidated sediment. Now, that's not a problem for a uniformitarian model. Having again, well, again, I mean, there are. I mean, if two sides of an area were potentially uplifted, either due to faulting or folding or due to other processes, then yeah, sure. I would imagine that the explanation would be that it didn't form at the time when those mountains were tall. It was at a time when the mountains were very again, I'm not a geologist, so I can't explain this very well. But yeah, I think that explanation would be very reasonable. That the river would have had to have been older than its current topography. Now, in regards to what you said about the erosion of soil, now I can answer that again, Nephi. You failed to account for the fact that there is new formation of land, and according to uniformitarian model, Nephi, the land itself is changes all the time. So what you're referring to is nothing more than shifting of the forms of the continents, not due to erosion and uplifting. It's nothing. What you're describing is only one half of the dynamic process which shapes the surface of the Earth. Now, in regards to what you said about the Dust Bowl, I wasn't making the argument. I was just using that to point out a phenomena as to what occurs when there are no roots to hold in the soil. Now, yes, Nevi, I will acknowledge that soil erosion cannot be completely prevented, Nefi. However, the lichens and other forms of and grasses and other forms of plant life do form soil at a rate, and if there is soil at the top of those mountains, then one can reasonably conclude that soil must be created faster and held faster than it is being eroded. Now, in regards to in regards to plant life holding in regards to the fact that the grasses are there, Nephi. The grasses could have been, the plants and everything and whatnot could have been there to replace other forms of life that would have formed on that mountain when it originally was uplifted. And keep in mind, according to the uniformitarian model, all mountains are, for all intents and purposes, uplifted either due to plate tectonics, faults, or volcanic activity, or other phenomena. And I see no reason as to why, due to the gradual increase on the angle of that why there could not have been plant life covering that mountain as it rose up. Now, and that would have held in the soil. That would have actually provided for the amount of soil that would have been the case. And there are many tops of mountains, Nephi, where there are where there's very negligible amounts of life due to the fact that the soil has due to the fact that the erosion rate exceeds that of the formation of soil. And if you in the Rocky Mountains, there are many such examples of mountains with mostly barren peaks. So I don't see that. I don't see that as a serious challenge to the uniformitarian model. I don't really. Let's see. Let me check my notes here if I can bring up something. Oh, here's one. One thing that I'll leave you with, Nephi, before I turn over my time to you, is the fact that is the thermodynamics of calcite formation. You see, actually, no. Let me address what you said about the meteor and the Chicxulub crater. Then explain the vast quantity of, I believe it's iridium, if I'm not mistaken, that is in that crater. Explain the quantity of materials that are not normally formed on the Earth. And now, before I go, in regards to what you said about the plants being formed with craters, why? Why would the planets be formed with evidence of horrendous bombardment early in its history? All right, thank you. Hold on a sec. Hey, Nephi, you there?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hold on just one second. I'm going to go grab
okay.
something to drink really quick.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just give me 1 sec. I'll be back in like 2.
Okay.
All right, sorry about that.
Okay. Well, I don't see how you've adequately answered for the soil on top of mountains. I don't believe it's logical that plants are going to create the soil faster than it erodes. That doesn't make sense. Also, you admitted that the mountain was soft sediments when the river ate through it at water gaps. That fits the that contradicts uniformitarianism, but it fits with the Noahic flood account of water moving in vast sheets at high rates of speed as it receded from the continents and flowed off into the now deeper oceans. The Chicxulub crater, how do we explain the iridium in it? Well, I think that's easy. If it's in fact what the creationist says, like some other examples unknown to exist on the Earth, where a giant blob of volcanic mud and other materials bloop up out of the surface of the Earth and create a pool like that, a giant hole in the ground, well, where'd the iridium come from? Well, inside the Earth. That's where it came from, and that's why there's so much there. In fact, the K2 boundary is explained. This iridium layer across the Earth is explainable by the flood of Noah. Hot waters ejected from the fountains of the deep on the ocean floors. That's where they are today, the cracks. And they were in the continents at the time that they split. And the minerals inside the Earth, which form the geologic column in the fossil record, came from within the Earth. Thus, you have different materials coming out from the inside the Earth, and the water at during certain point, a stage during the flood of Noah, possessed a lot of iridium, which settled out to create a layer of iridium in the Earth. So that's explainable by the flood of Noah. I don't see how it could possibly be explainable by uniformitarianism. If uniformitarianism were true, there shouldn't be a layer of iridium globally. Just a layer. It should be much more evenly distributed all across the continents, all over the world. If the continents are millions of years old, there shouldn't be a relatively thin layer of material in Earth which contains an unusually high level of iridium. That doesn't fit uniformitarianism. See, but it fits the young Earth. So I think I've adequately provided geological evidence. I could provide much more geological evidence that the Earth is not a vast age. Let me give you some astrological. I intend to give other evidences too, but let me give you some cosmological evidences that the Earth is not of vast ages. The solar system, the evidence from the solar system, which defies secular theories for its formation, but could be accounted for by young Earth creation. So let me give you an example. The nebular hypothesis doesn't work. The idea that a star exploded and its remnant created gas cloud that condensed and accreted into the planets doesn't work. None of the planets, the properties of all the planets, defy the theory. Firstly, accretion has been tested since at least 1970 in the laboratory, and it's been discovered that space dust does not have enough gravity to accrete. It's not going to happen. Planets will not form by this process. But it's the only model in town, only game in town for the uniformitarianists, so they have to stick to it. The density of Mercury, for example, is so great that its core possesses 75% of its diameter. That can't be explained by their theory. I can quote you scientists on that. Magnetic field strength is claimed to be billions of years old. I've already discussed that. Magnetic field decay rate of Mariner the space machine probe studied the magnetic field. And Russell Humphrey says Mercury's decay rate is so rapid that at some future space probe could detect it fairly soon. In 1990, the planet's magnetic moment should be 1.8% smaller than its 1975 value. The observed rate with Mercury's magnetic field decay is synonymous with thousands of years. It also has an unorthodox perihelion. It should not. Venus's rotation is retrograde. That contradicts the second law of thermodynamics, conservation of angular momentum. To fix this, they claim it's been impacted. Impact on the outside of a planet that weighs trillions of tons would simply cause the planet to smash into bits. It would destroy itself from the internal inertia. It wouldn't just stop and start spinning backwards. That's a ridiculous idea. Venus has the most circular orbit in all of the planets in our solar system. If it had been impacted enough to make it spin the other direction, that wouldn't be so. It would have a weird, wild orbit, but not. It's the most circular of any planet in our solar system. So my time is up, but the list goes on and on. So I'll start the timer for you.
Okay. Well, Nephi, first and foremost, I want to I'm very incredulous about the idea of accretion, because that seems to be quite strange to me, given how we actually have a confirmed example of a protoplanet. I'll post this in Skype. We can confirm this, Nephi. We actually have a confirmed example of a protoplanet. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this is in around in a disk of gas and dust surrounding the very young star Pleiades 70. So we actually do have a confirmed example of a nascent planet. So if the accretion model doesn't work, Nephi, then why do we find that? Excuse me. Why do we find that there is a? Why do we find that in all of our models, right? Why do we find that there are accretion disks, and why do we find that there are planets forming? Why is it that we can observe and see all the intermediate features of planetary formation? Now, for the record, Nephi, that is a gas giant. However, the discovery of exoplanets around, a proto-exoplanet around the star's accretion disk is a very, very interesting phenomenon. I don't think that it would be, unless you're claiming that we are seeing a modern-day miracle, that would be very odd if the accretion model did not function. Now, in regards to what you said about Mercury, the Mercury is pockmarked by craters, and a small amount of sulfur will actually heat the core enough to cause a small amount of magnetism in Mercury, consistent with what we observe. Now, you might object by saying that could not have been formed during the accretion model. However, Mercury again is pockmarked by craters, and that in of itself actually, yes, explains the mechanism by which the sulfur could have got there, in that it was transported by an asteroid. I know that seems might seem quite ad hoc to you. However, I assure you that it's very reasonable given the amount of craters on Mercury. Now, in regards to what you said about Venus, no, it was not struck. It's actually the reason for the reversal of its spin is actually due to tidal friction, or due to tidal forces on the planet between the sun and its atmosphere, in its thick atmosphere, and that is the reason behind its slow retrograde. So that is my explanation of that. Now, in regards to what you said about the water gaps, Nephi, again, in regards to that, I fail to see how the cyclonic water currents in Baumgartner and Barnett would have even produced such things. In fact, why would it have produced that, as opposed to why would the cyclonic water currents not have simply torn through the entire mountain? And there's also another problem, Effie, in that you have a problem with the iridium. I don't see why that would be in a layer in a flood model. In fact, actually, all that iridium from that blob would have been distributed over the entire planet by the flood model. So I think that your the problem that you pointed out for me is actually not a problem for me. It's a problem for you. The uniformitarian model can completely explain why there's a layer. That's because layers of sediment were built on top of it. But if that were not the case, then we should, again, because all that sediment was mixed and had to have been created in a year, then yeah, sure, we should have seen a huge amount of iridium all over the planet in a flood model. Why would the flood model not have stirred up all the material? And that's the end of my time. Excuse me. That's the end of my time. Apologies. Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Okay, starting my timer. So the answer to your question is, are you okay?
Yeah, sorry, hold on. Just
okay.
Sorry about that. I've been talking for a while and I leaves my throat a bit scratchy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So starting my timer. The answer is that various materials are available at different depths within the Earth, and so as the waters that burst out of the Earth came out during the Noahic flood, some of the materials that it began eroding ran into the iridium and removed the iridium, put it out, and it settled. I think it's easily explainable what a flood of Noah. Now, the ideas of accretion, the article that you provided really starts with an assumption. And the assumption is this, that the planet began accreting at some point in the past. But all they're really showing is that it's it's likely that it's drawing, this gas giant is drawing the dust in space around it to itself currently. That you're already starting with the gas giant. You're assuming the gas giant could form this way. Scientists are acknowledging that's not so. For example, J. Blum, Laboratory and Space Experiments to Study Planetary Growth Advances in Space Research, post 1995, says this: the theoretical considerations in their predictions for the development of solid bodies in the early solar system strongly depend on a couple of assumptions, the validity of which can only be proven experimentally. Among the processes to be determined empirically are the low velocity collision behavior of single dust grains and accretion, including simulated experiments on the long-term dust aggregation. So he found no evidence for it. Hartman in 1993 said, ordinary evidence suggests that if neighboring sun-orbiting rock particles hit at low speeds, they would simply bounce apart without sticking, and they hit at high speeds, they would rather shatter instead of combining. And he quotes another science researcher on the matter, designed experiments with silicate particles hitting each other at various speeds, and they simply shattered. So instead of sticking, they're not like glue. They just bump into each other and either shatter each other or bounce off and go flying in somewhere else. All the experiments performed trying to prove accretion have failed. In 2003, published in New Scientist, Earth Was a Freak, the author states, while asteroid-sized rocks would have accreted in the inner solar system, they would not have melted and clumped together to form planets. The solid rocks would just zoom past each other or collide like snooker balls. And also in Astrobiology Institute 2007 published, although we have dismissed the sticking of dust grains as unnecessary to the planetary accretion process, there is more fundamental reason for disregarding it altogether. That is, even the dust grains tended to stick together upon impact, the growth of solid bodies by this process would be much slower than the gravitational instabilities we have described. So scientists are acknowledging that their accretion disk theory does not work. They don't have a workable model for it. The physics, the experiments show it doesn't happen. We can't make it happen in the lab, and the mathematics of the gravity of space dust shows us it won't happen. It's just an ad hoc explanation for the existence of the planets in the solar system, which defy uniformitarianism and scream that they were formed by an all-powerful being who can defy physics, because physics can't account for them. For example, Uh, you cannot explain why if Venus was impacted in this or it or even if it weren't, why it would have with its retrograde motion the most circular orbit. If it had been experiencing gravitational tug of war with a planet, gravitational friction, it still should not have the most circular orbit. It has an absence of water. It has spinning vortices. It's very geologically active. This was not the kind of thing that's going to form nearly perfect circle around the sun. Problems with the Earth. The distance from the sun. The Earth is just the right distance and the moon just the right distance for the Earth to hold life. It can't be accounted for by chance. That's accounted for by design. It has an abundance of water. Its core protects life with its magnetic field. This also screams of design. A core that defies secular theory. The Earth's core should not even exist. Source for that is Huget et al. 2018, pages 9 through 20. So the magnetic field of data supports a young Earth. Mars, Jupiter, chemical makeup is wrong for Jupiter. It should not have its current chemical makeup. Its core is too small. Recent attempts to solve its migration only made the problem worse. Fatal problems for its core theory. No time for it to form. Shouldn't have formed at all. Distance from the sun is a problem. Rotates once every 10 hours. Where to get the energy to spin up like that? The list goes on and on and on. The planets defy secular uniformitarianism. And my time is up.
All right, Nephi. Well, the first thing that I want to ask you is, so I want to ask you a question. You're not, so in regards to what you said about a supernatural being able to circumvent physics, that contradicts the scientific method. Here's the thing: science is based off of a set of assumptions, and those assumptions are what makes scientific reasoning possible, Nephi. Now, if we're going to bring in supernatural beings that can circumvent the laws of physics, Nephi, why should I choose your convention as opposed to the conventions of others? Now, again, the problem with this is that, again, if we're going to bring in supernatural occurrences, then why can't I say, for example, ghosts made the accretion model? Now, again, science is, due to its very nature, is naturalistic. Actually, I'll pull up the assumptions made by science here. There are several things. There are natural causes for all the things in the world that happen around us. Evidences from the natural world can be used to learn about those causes, and that there is a consistency in the causes that operate in the natural world. Now, Nephi, I want to bring this up because if we're going to be arguing that supernatural beings are the cause behind the universe's phenomena, that can be applied to literally anything. And if I can make up all manner of ad hoc supernatural explanations for how the universe was made, but science is concerned about building reliable knowledge about the natural world. It says nothing about supernatural explanations. Now, in regards to what you said about accretion, Nephi, yes, there is another force that you're not taking into account. In that there are electrostatic interactions between the particles, which actually cause them to stick together like glue. If you actually look at there are videos by NASA, and I'll publish one of them. I'll publish one of them in the Skype chat in just a moment. I don't see a reason why the accretion model is at all in jeopardy. There are plenty of, for example, smaller bodies, namely asteroids that are nothing more than dirty snowballs. If the accretion model failed, then explain to me why those asteroids would have been why there are asteroids that are nothing more than simply dust balls that have conglomerated together. In regards to what you said about the Earth, I'm not trying to argue, Nephi, that there isn't design. What I'm arguing is that you deviated from the topic of this debate. I'm arguing that the Earth itself is old, and you have done very little, if anything at all, to disprove that. Now, Nephi, again, I'm just going to go back to all the other. Excuse me. Again, I'm just going to go back to this, Nephi. To the accretion disk that I gave you. Yeah, sure. It's an assumption, Effie, that that the laws of physics are going to work in the same way as they did in the past, and the assumption that, yeah, sure, I will acknowledge to you, Nephi, that it is an assumption that it was accreting. However, Nephi, here's the problem. Here's why this is confirmation of this. It's because from the fact that we have mass falling onto this gas giant from the accretion disk, we have confirmation of this, of a body that is gaining mass from an accretion disk. Now, that is something that is predicted, Nephi, by an accretion model. Now, if accretion is impossible, again, I ask you again, how is that accretion disk possible? And why are we finding gas giants inside of an accretion disk? Why are we assuming, Nephi, that the gas giant equally in young Earth creationism, why are we assuming, Nephi, that gas giants potentially hundreds, if not thousands of light years away, formed like that from the onset of the universe? I think that that is a much more unreasonable and unfounded assumption to make than the idea of, than the idea of an accretion model. Now, in regards to the chemistry of the solar system, sure. I mean, I don't know why the chemistry of the solar system is the way that it is. That falls outside of my area of expertise, and I don't think that I can necessarily account for all of it. So yeah, sure, I'll admit that there are anomalies that might introduce problems for those who believe that the Earth is old. However, you've done very little. However, I would like to point out again that you have yet to solve the starlight problem, and that alone in of itself is enough to refute young Earth creationism. I mean, I really don't have much to say because most of this falls outside my area of expertise. I'm not a terribly well-educated individual in planetary geophysics and chemistry. My specialization is not in astronomy. But in theoretical physics. So I can't really answer why the material compositions of the planet are the way that they are. But I do want to address with the remainder of the time what you said about the quantity of the iridium in the Chicxulub crater. Why would it be concentrated in only a single layer? Why only at the K2 boundary? That seems very strange. I mean, certainly we would expect a gradation of layers if that were the case. I mean, and furthermore, why wouldn't you see draining of it due to the Darcy flow after the flood? And I think that that will conclude my statements.
Starting timer. I think I answered that. I disagree with your assessment of the evidence I provided, of course. I think I answered that. On top of that, water sorts materials by density, particle size. It fits a global flood that we would find layers of things. It doesn't fit uniformitarianism. Can't explain the geologic column with uniformitarianism. Materials should gradiate from one into another. Moving water sorts materials by particle size and density. That can explain a layer of anything, but you can't get that with uniformitarianism. Millions and millions of, there is no process in the geology of the Earth where one material is only available during this 11,000 years, and then for some reason it's just not available anymore, and something else is available now. Where this would require the continents to be changing in composition constantly to provide composition for themselves. It would be quite absurd. So I think I've provided adequate evidence. I could provide much more for the lines of evidence that I've been providing. I'm going to speak now of historical evidence that the Earth is not a vast age. And that is the table of nations in the book of Genesis. It proves itself to be an account of real human history. And if that's true, then the flood of Noah and the Tower of Babel affair are true. And if that's true, the earth cannot be of vast ages, because this means that all of human history can be wrapped up in 4,500 years. Let me give you an example. The Bible states that Genesis 6:10, Noah had begat three sons, Shem, Ham, his name would be pronounced Ham in Hebrew, and Yafet. Okay, Shem, Ham, and Yafet. Now, if it were true that Shem, Yafet, and Ham actually existed on the earth and were the fathers of all of mankind after the flood of Noah, we should find extra biblical evidence for that. And it just so happens that we really, really, really do. So, for example, Shem is the father of a people that came from him. They're called Shemites. We call them today Semites, the Semitic peoples of the earth. There are also ancient people of the world that historians acknowledge called Hamites. They're the offspring of, guess who? Ham. Now, interesting, the Bible says that Shem had sons, and the children of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Now, if that's true, we should find historical evidence that those men really existed in the history of the earth, and just so happens we do. The first of them is Elam. Where do we have evidence for Elam? Well, Elam, here's Elam. This is a Wikipedia page, a relatively poor source of scientific truth, I know, but I mean, how wrong can you get about the fact that the Elamic Empire existed? And there it is, just on the other side of the Persian Gulf from the Arabian Peninsula. The Elam. The Bible says that up here in the plain of Shinar is where the people migrated from Anatolia when they got off the ark, and they stayed there for a short period of time. Migrated to the plain of Shinar. There was a Tower of Babel affair in 110 years or so later, and people split off from there. Elam took his family and migrated right there and started a nation, and they named that nation after him. Elam is the foundation of the historical nation Elama, one of the oldest nations in the history of the world. Now, the Bible says also that Ham, the son of Noah, migrated to Africa. It just so happens that here, this is an article named Kemet, or Kemt, K-M-T, The History of Egypt on Wikipedia. And this is what they say. Now, these people are no friends to the truth. So here we find that here it is, KMT, without vowels, the origin of the name Kemet, and there's the word right there, Kemet, would be pronounced in Hebrew, Hamet. And it just so happens that the historian Plutarch wrote the oldest known name, and he lived centuries before Christ. The oldest known name of the history of Egypt was, the name of the land was Kemet, and they named the god there, they named the land, the god, Hamet, and they named the land Hamya. Well, this would have been named after who? Well, Ham. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. We go back to the Table of Nations. We find that Ham, one of the sons of Shem, is one of the offspring of Shem is Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Okay? Well, there's Ashur. Wait, Put. Well, I don't have time. I'll extend that.
I'll let you go on, because this is very interesting to me.
Okay. So back to, I appreciate that. So back to, here it is, the sons of Ham, Genesis 6:10. Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan were the sons of Ham. Right? Now, Cush, where is Cush? Cush is the oldest name for Ethiopia known to history. The people that lived there were called Cushites, and Moses married a Cushite woman, in fact. So there's no question about it. Secular historians acknowledge that Cush was the ancient name for Ethiopia. It's not argued. Historians are on board. That's a fact, according to history. Okay, so Cush, we have Cush. Now, what about Mizraim? Well, let's go back to the article about Egypt, and we find right above that, where it speaks of Kemet, Kemt, here we have M-I-S-R. Now, this would be M-I-S-R without vowels. Who is that? That's Mizraim. And here we see it in in Egypt, M-I-S-R, Mizraim. This is the to the very day, Egyptian people consider themselves the Misri people. They were known as the Masurs to other people. Babylonians, for example, called them Masurs. They were called the Masris by various tribes, the Assyrians. They had different names for them according to their own language, but it's always sounding very much like Masurs, Misri, Masurians, like this, and named after Misraim. So to this very day, we find, and here it is, Mizraim. We see in Hebrew, the word is pronounced Mizraim. And that's exactly what the Bible says. It says that the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. Now, Phut is a word that you can find in ancient Egyptian inscription, Phut. And Canaan, well, that's the Canaanites. See, so this is real human history. And I'm just beginning to scratch the surface. I'm only talking about the begun to point to a couple of the grandsons of Noah. This evidence gets extremely extensive, and we can show that the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren of Shem, Japhet, and Ham are in fact the fathers of entire nations in the early history of mankind. So the Bible proves itself to be real, true human history. This account is true. If that's true, the out of Africa story is false. And because all this took place at the Tower of Babel affair, right after the 100 years or 110 years after the flood of Noah, and all the imaginary millions of years that exist in the past are imaginary. So that's, I appreciate you giving me a little extra time to explain. There's so much more I can say about this. I'm only scratching the surface, but okay, I'll give it over to you now.
Hold on one sec. I do want to ask you a few questions. How do you explain Caucasians, the peoples of Europe?
The same way I explain taking two dogs and getting Chihuahuas, Collies, Great Danes, wolves, or taking two wolves and getting German Shepherds or Irish Setters or Golden Retrievers. Just genetic variation.
Now, hold on. Which son produced the peoples of Europe and Native Americans and Aborigines? Japhet?
For the most part, Japhet, yes.
All right. Thank you. All right. Now, all right. So I do want to go into this first and foremost. So in regards to this, I want to question this because this only makes sense if we do not presume a vast period of prehistory. Now, Nephi, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I cannot explain to you why. Again, I'm not a historian. I'll admit to you, I have a vast ignorance of much of early human history. However,
I'm going to come in here and make dinner in a little while. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I'm sorry. I was speaking to my wife. I'll mute myself. Okay, please continue.
No, that's important. Yes. Okay. So, in regards to that, I don't see a reason as to why that would necessarily be any sort of problem. Nephi. Now, I don't know. How do I put this? So, in regards to this, I'm not even certain that the out of Africa theory is correct. There's an article recently, and I'll try and find it, but there was early human fossils found in Greece, or excuse me, one of the areas in kind of southern Europe. So that kind of puts the notion of the out of Africa theory to be kind of to the test. And I don't necessarily know if that's accurate. Now, I do want to address the thing. I don't necessarily see how the historical phenomena even explains why the Earth would necessarily be young. I mean, certainly there was a time in the universe prior to humanity. I mean, this only makes sense if we discount the vast Neolithic periods and the vast expanses of time in which there was very little civilization, if any. This also discounts the fact that, again, there could have been huge periods of time without humans. And again, if that is the case, Nephi, if it is the case, then that we should experience, if that is the case that these individuals produced most of modern man, then the problem with that is that we should expect to see extraordinarily high inbreeding coefficients within all modern day populations, because again, over the course of a few thousand years, I don't necessarily know why that would entirely disappear. You would expect to see certain genetic defects present in all these individuals are reflected in the broad expanse of humanity. But again, we do see that different groups of people have different um, different sorts of genetic diseases and whatnot, and there are different there are different there is a homogeneity rather between various groups of humans. I want to avoid the word race here for obvious reasons, but I don't necessarily see why the world would be, why all of humanity would be produced by by only a few people. I mean, certainly we would expect that to show very clearly in the genetics, and specifically, we should be able to trace that. However, I don't necessarily see that to be the case. I don't have the genetics with me, and again, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so that would be my weakest argument, and I don't even know if that and again, I don't even know if the argument that I'm making is necessarily warranted, but that is what I would expect to see. I would expect to see that we should see a fairly significant variation between the races, as it were, of man, if that were to exist. We should see more than phenotypic differences. We should see that there should be a great difference in various other features. I fail to see how that would not result in scientific racism, as it were. Now, in regards to history, again, I don't see why that would necessarily be an accurate account. This, again, discounts prehistory. And again, I'm not a historian. I cannot answer those questions accurately, and I'm not necessarily even certain if the argument that I'm making is wholly valid. However, from historical texts, we do know that there are certain inaccuracies in all texts, and that could be, and for example, in most histories, primary figures are often left in, whereas certain minor figures are often omitted. So again, I don't necessarily see why the several sons hypothesis is necessarily an indicator of the Earth's history. I'll turn that over to you. And again, I do apologize. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a historian, so that is perhaps my weakest argument. But again, I do hold that the physical evidence for the Earth does contradict the young age. So I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, so the question is an interesting one and a good one. Why inbreeding didn't just really eradicate mankind?
Yeah.
I think the explanation of that is found within young Earth creation itself, and supported by the secular science, which shows the rate of decay of the human genome. In the beginning, God created good genomes. The Bible says that Noah, he was perfect in his generations. That's a very interesting statement. Very interesting. Why would the Bible say Noah was perfect in his generations? And it's not talking about a spiritual thing, because at the next line it says, and walked with God. And the next words are. So there's the spiritual part. What does it mean when it says perfect in his generations and walked with God? It's referring to genetics. His bloodline was not corrupted by the evils of the Nephilim, and it was not corrupted by damaged in any significant way by random mutation prior to the flood, 1670 some odd years or so between creation and the flood. So Noah gets off the ark with a beautiful genome, uncorrupted, not badly damaged, excellent information. With that information, in the early history of man, you could have inbreeding and it would not produce deformity, because to get the deformities from inbreeding, you have to have mother and parent both have the defunct gene. If two close relatives inbreed, the offspring will be viable and should be healthy unless one of them has a gene X. I'll call it gene X. And gene X has been damaged by mutation and it causes disease. Now, they marry somebody who doesn't have damage to gene X. The offspring is likely to be viable. But if mother and father have gene X that's damaged by mutation, they have the same corrupt gene, Now you've got a problem because the offspring gets a copy from mom and dad, and they end up with a severe disease like Down syndrome or something. So inbreeding is caused. The problems of inbreeding are caused by mutation damaging genes and getting a copy of the damaged gene from mom and dad. In the beginning, that wouldn't have been the problem. See, that's a problem that occurred after the flood, and that's why inbreeding is no longer viable, and why God said, no longer do it. No longer, there will be no more of this. And he actually says so in the Bible. Okay, so that explains that. Now, let me continue to provide you with some very interesting information here while I still have some time. So here we see, continuing this line of argument, I explained Shem. Now the Bible says in Genesis 10:22, the children of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Well, where's the evidence for Ashur? Well, here's Ashur. This is from a secular history encyclopedia. You'll find this in the Encyclopedia Britannica and everywhere. Ashur is the name of one of the oldest nations in the world. The father of the people called the Assyrians or Ashurians. And here they even mention Assyria. Okay, so the name Assyria is a derivative of Ashur. And the Bible says what? Says the sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. Interesting. Now, so what about Lud? Well, here's Lud, Genesis 10. And Mizraim begat Ludim, that's Ludim, but here's Lud. And the ancient historians recognize that they wrote of people called the Lud, or Ludbu, or Ludim, or Ludimim. And these people lived in Lydia, which is Libya today, northwestern Africa. So to this day, we have the nation of Lydia, or Libya, was first called Lydia, named after Lud, who is a grandson of Noah. Now, what about Aram? Well, Aram, we don't have a nation for Aram. Aram didn't form a nation. But he did give us one remarkable thing, the Aramaic language, which Jesus Christ spoke, and the Bible contains quite a few Aramaic words in it. So the Aramaic language was the language of Aram. Now, also, what about Arphaxad? Genesis 10:22 says, Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. We've accounted for Shem, Elam, Ashur, and Lud, and Aram. What about Arphaxad? Well, the ancient historians wrote of the Arphaxades or Arphaxadites, the Kuro-Arxes in the Nuzi tablets written by the Hurrians.
Go on.
So the Aramaic language was spoken by Arphaxad, also by the Chaldeans. Our Chaldean language is our Aramaic language. Everybody knows in secular history the Chaldeans were a real people, and they spoke the Aramaic language. It's the same language. The language of the Chaldeans was Aramaic. So these would have been the offspring of Aram. And so, according to secular historical sources, we have the Arpura, the Aruha, written of by the Akkadians, the Arphaxades, written of by the ancient historian Ptolemy, and the Kuro-Arxes also. So we find etymology in ancient peoples related to Arphaxad as well. Now, the Bible goes to say that the sons of Japheth, that's the third son of Noah, were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. So what about Madai? Well, his descendants became the Madians of ancient history, better known as the Medes. These people were famous for their war with the Assyrians. Everybody in history, as a historian, knows about the Madians or the Medes. Okay, so this is a direct. Madai is the name of the man, and Madians or Medes is the offspring, the people that he fathered. The Greeks know him as Madai. Old Persian inscriptions speak of Mada, and the Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria, had a war with these people. They called them the Medes. So we have evidence of him as well. And I can go on and on through the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, and sometimes great-great-great-grandchildren of Noah, and show that the early historical account of the tribes of mankind were directly named etymologically after the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren of Noah. Now, this astonishing mountain of ancient historical evidence lining up beautifully with the names of the children and the offspring of Noah is not logical that would be a coincidence. There has to be a historical reason for this. It points to the fact that the Tower of Babel affair, the Genesis account in the Bible of Noah getting off an ark after a flood, the people moving to Babel and forming a single culture and splitting off from there, not out of Africa, splitting off from there, and all these early nations of the earth being named after the offspring of Noah is real human history. If that's really human history, the earth is not billions of years old, because all of mankind dispersed from an ark, and that family produced all of the tribes of mankind only 4,500 years ago. So this would kill uniformitarianism if it's true. And as I've said, I've only scratched the surface. There is a mountain of this evidence. The evidence for Peleg and Japhet in ancient history, how they recorded and remembered those names, is very, very extensive. But I think I've gone over my time already, so I'm going to pass it off.
All right. Well, the first thing that I want to mention is this. Now, in regards to the Germanic peoples, this I fail to see. There is a significant amount of Neanderthal DNA in Europeans that are not present in other forms of in other human beings. So that's my first concern with this, in that there does seem to be intermarriage with hominids. The additional thing is this: if that is the case, then how does that account for Native Americans and Native Americans and Aborigines people whom were separated by vast islands and would have had to have built watercraft to get there? It makes very little sense that these societies would be around have degenerated to such an extent that they are no longer capable of producing complicated tools and civilizations on their island homes, unless for whatever reason these peoples who went to America and to the very specific islands were significantly degraded in their mental faculties, such that they were not able to reproduce this. It seems very interesting that it seems very interesting that these peoples would be unable to build vast civilizations. For example, if you look at in Africa, there was the Sultan of the Barbary States. One of the sultans of the Barbary States stated that there was very little in the way of civilization south of them. And if you look at the developmental state of sub-Saharan Africa, that entire area is very underdeveloped. There is no or very little evidence of complicated civilization, other than perhaps a small number of city-states, despite the apparent richness of that area. Why is it that these civilizations were not able to develop so quickly, despite, in many cases, why were they unable to form the complex civilizations, say, for example, that Europeans and the Chinese and other groups of people were able to form? It seems very interesting, given how resources, and I don't think that geography ought to be a barrier, given how if civilization truly did develop rapidly after the flood, we should expect that all people should have a roughly similar level of development.
Okay, well, you have 2 minutes left. Do you want to just go on and let me respond, or you want to take some
go
time?
Okay. Go on. I find it quite interesting.
Okay. So I disagree with you that These Aboriginal people, for example, are mentally decrepit or anything.
Well, I'm not claiming that.
Well, you kind of said that. That they're underdeveloped and all. Firstly, how they got there, they could have gotten there two ways. They could have made boats. Uh, One of the evidences that the Earth is young is an explanation that when man bursts onto the scene, he appears with astronomy, medicine, archaeology. I mean, not archaeology, but astronomy, um, agriculture, animal husbandry, literature, architecture, stonemasonry, cutting stones of massive size to such absolute incredible precision that you can't put a piece of paper between them. These guys were not stupid. They came off the ark. They were smart. They were smarter than you and me will ever be. The human mind is decaying because our brains are defective and we're unable to think as clearly as, and we don't have the intelligence that Shem Yafet Nam had. They probably had an IQ of 220. We are way below them now. So, by the way, when it comes to Aboriginal people, I don't know if you've ever heard of Sir Lionel Luckhoo. He was an Aborigine man who was the only man in the history of the British Empire to be knighted and who held two ambassadorship of position for two different nations for the British Empire at the same time. He was an award-winning, famous lawyer who acquitted 200 murder suspects in a row. That's a world record attorney. There was no attorney like him on the earth. And he was an Aboriginal man, no more than 5, 6, or 7 inches tall. And he was just like an Aborigine you see today. Yet he was a brilliant man, a world famous lawyer, and an officer in the British Empire, knighted by Queen Elizabeth. So, I mean, he certainly wasn't of low intelligence. To acquit 200 murder suspects in a row is an attorney record that is just famous. They talk about him to this day in law schools. You know, he's genius. So I don't see any reason to believe that Aboriginal people are underdeveloped in any way. So, or Africans or any Polynesians or anybody else that the average white person from England or France would have thought was, according to evolution theory, 150 years ago.
Well, yes, but I do want to address this, yes, because, well, yeah, so I want to clarify that's precisely my problem. These people seem, when they're educated, very, very intelligent, and they're capable of producing geniuses. But the problem with the arc hypothesis is that these people would have possessed advanced agricultural technologies, advanced architecture, language, written languages. They would have possessed vast understandings of mathematics and various other things that you described. Why is it that we don't see a homogeneity of such great works? I mean, if you look at, for example, again with Polynesians, Aborigines, and Sub-Saharan Africans, if you look at these groups of people, you would expect to see the same pyramids being constructed in those areas, in vastly greater quantities. In fact, Sub-Saharan Africa should be the richest and most powerful and one of the oldest civilizations to ever existed. It should have never been colonized. If the Aborigines, why would they have lost the ability to build such advanced ships that would have got them to where they were? These people are quite intelligent if you meet them, and I think that we both have experienced them. And so my question is this: like, if these peoples had this knowledge, where did that go? For example, if you look at Native Americans, they don't have the alphabetical languages that the Western peoples do. They don't have if you look at the Chinese, they have a pictographic language. Now, this makes perfect sense if we acknowledge that civilizations developed independently from one another in different areas, but not if they came from the same group of unbelievably intelligent people.
I understand your question. I think there's a perfectly plausible explanation for it. I think at the Tower of Babel affair, it's quite possible that since there were only thousands of people there and not millions, nobody knows exactly how many thousands, at least 5 or 10 probably, possibly as many as 20 or 40,000 people. I think probably less than that, probably much less than 50,000 people. It's very likely that one group of people, this would have been a dictatorship sort of situation, where everybody, to have that kind of organization requires government. Everybody working to build a single culture and a single tower that they think is going to bring God down to them. The idea wasn't, they weren't trying to build a tower so they can get up to God. They were trying to build a tower to force God to come down to them, which God found offensive anyway. I think it's likely that people would have been organized for different tasks at that event during the Tower of Babel affair, and it's likely that entire family groups, which is what they were, large family groups, would have. It's very likely that it's conceivable that a whole family group could have been designated to nothing but manual labor, and you move the stones, we design them and cut them. You just shut up and do your work. And so that would have precluded them from any education, any learning, any teaching about geometry or physics or stone cutting techniques. They would have just been physical laborers. And if that were the case, after the Tower of Babel affair, they would have left the Tower of Babel affair with limited knowledge. Whereas another group of people who were considered the elite at that event would have had, the mathematical and skills, perhaps, and engineering skills to design the stuff that they were doing, and they would have could have perhaps migrated off and been the children of Japhet and become the European peoples or the Egyptians, who were very fluent in that, and even the Babylonians, who made monuments of astonishing proportions. I would also point out, though, however, some of these people did make astonishing things. Look at Machu Picchu. Look at the Native American, the Aztec, Mayan, Incans, and Polynesians. And look at what they have built. Stone walls with all of the stones can be completely irregular, and they fit together so fine you can't put a piece of paper between them. Nobody knows exactly how in the world they did this. How'd they cut these stones with flat edges so that they fit together like Lego blocks, and yet every one of them is a completely irregular shape? There's one possible explanation for that, is that they knew how to form the stones by heating and melting them. And maybe they had a giant works process where they were actually melting stone and using a scoop and forming blobs of it and molding the stones, custom molding them as they installed them. And that one then shaped them with boards or metal implements that would, let's squeeze it in a little bit here and bang it in a little there. As it cools, it forms a solid stone. That would explain how they could have made these stone walls of massive stones with completely irregular shapes, and all of them fit together just like a glove. So they did demonstrate, even these people, these simple people who didn't build a lot of things, absolutely, sometimes they did. The Aborigines didn't, apparently, but Polynesians and Native American peoples did stoneworks that were just baffle the experts to this day. So there was some engineering skills there. They had some knowledge we're lacking today because we don't know how they did it. In Bolivia, stones cut with mathematical precision show machine marks. In Egypt, all around the world, where somebody was using a saw capable of cutting through stone, you can see where they cut into the stone and then say, oops, we got the math wrong, and let's do it over. And they moved it over a little bit and they started sawing again. So these machines, and drilling holes too in stone. So man's knowledge at that early age in history, and it does contradict the uniformitarian idea. Out of Africa and man being adult, ask yourself this question. What's logical about man coming out of Africa as a hominid, or early human, and then after becoming Homo sapiens sapiens, fully human, and was fully human for 250,000 or so years or more, which is what the evolutionists today believe, that man was just like you and me. You could go back in time 200,000 years ago and meet a guy in Europe, and guess what? He would look just like John down the street. He was fully human. That's what the evolutionists say. Okay. So what's logical about a human being fully human for 250,000 years, incapable of designing a wheel, a trowel, a straight edge, cutting a stone, growing crops, None of that's just mindless dolt. If he had full human brain and was completely human, see, that doesn't wash. But if the Tower of Babel affair was true, man started out fully intelligent, completely human, and began designing amazing things right off the bat. So this evidence fits with the young Earth thing and the theme, and with the biblical account, but it doesn't line up with the out of Africa thing, because you got to wonder, how could man have been fully human for 250,000 years and incapable of designing anything and used nothing but wood and stone and hunted animals with a loincloth for 250,000 years, and then 5,000 years ago, boom, all the technology fields in the world pop up except biology? I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, I think that I have an explanation for that. I don't know. Like, I've met some people who. Here's the thing, right? I know some pretty stupid people from high school, and I cannot fathom them ever. If they were in the wilds, I could not fathom them creating anything of note. In fact, I know people like that today. Well, I would imagine the reason why for one, they did not create anything is because, well, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you just don't have time to develop knowledge. In fact, actually, I would imagine that most of the early civilizations were built from wealthy hunter-gatherer tribes that had the time and wealth to be able to have a comfortable, little bit of a safety net so that they could experiment and develop agriculture. Now, for example, in desert islands with peoples who with peoples who, according to the flood model, ought to, because the way that they would have had to get there, they would have had to build something similar to a schooner or a caravel. They would have had to have built ships that were capable of crossing vast distances of ocean and storing huge quantities of food aboard. So,
well, why not land bridges? Because there are a lot of secular historians that believe man got to Australia by moving across a land bridge that's now underwater. There is a land bridge between Australia and Asia, and it's only several hundred feet deep, the sea right there. And if the ocean levels rose because the ice sheets that covered the continent at the Ice Age melted and covered the ocean, covered that land bridge, now man can't travel anymore. Some secular scientists, fully accredited ones, believe that's exactly how man got to Australia and Polynesia, was through these land bridges, which are now underwater. I think that's very plausible. In fact, I think that's probably the case. I don't see why they would get on a boat and take off when they have perfectly good land to live on right where they are. So it's not plausible they built boats and got there. They got there on foot, likely, and so did the animals that were there on foot. And now the land bridges are buried. And that would have had to have been only because the ice caps, the ice sheets that covered the north hemisphere of the Earth, because of the Ice Age, which I'm going to say was caused by the flood of Noah, I can explain why, melted, and the oceans got deeper. There are places off the coast of Spain and Greece and other places in Japan where man-made structures, there were cities and docks, right, that are underwater now, right? So ocean was obviously lower while man was using that as a dock for a shipping port. So the oceans have risen.
but the problem with that is if you look at these, for example, areas like Hawaii, that's built on a volcanic island chain with huge amounts of water surrounding it. And in fact, from a navigational standpoint, it's one of the most difficult areas to find in the world. If you look at other areas, I question why there would be a land bridge, say, between California and a nation like Hawaii.
No, I agree with you there. There wouldn't have been. No, those people would have been people who built boats and took to the seas looking for land. Maybe they had it out with other tribes and didn't know where else to go. They were cornered, and they thought, look, we just got to get out of here. Let's build some boats and get to the sea. We'll get away by sea and find some other place. Ended up in Hawaii. That's likely what happened there. Truly, there wasn't a land bridge between California and Hawaii. The geology of the Earth tells us that's not so. There was not one.
Well, but here's the thing in regards to Australia, though. Why was that destroyed so quickly? And furthermore, I also, now again, I don't necessarily know if this is true, but I was looking before this debate last night. I was looking up a geology video on a video of a creationist talking to a geologist near the Grand Canyon. He said that that, for example, something like the Grand Canyon would take from a state of mud many hundreds of millions of years to concrete. Now, if that's the case, why would we see solid? Well, actually, why should we see such why wouldn't the land bridges now? Because here's the thing, right? In order for these formations to be, I think, reasonably traversable by humans, I would imagine that they would have to have been concreted fairly quickly. Now, if that's the case, why don't we see? Why are those land bridges destroyed? What is yes? What would have caused their destruction after the flood?
Well, as I said, the ocean levels rose as the ice sheets that covered the northern hemisphere of the Earth, caused by the Noahic, the Ice Age, caused the ocean levels to rise, and that buried them under the water. So there are secular scientists who acknowledge this is what happened. They believe it's what happened. Others will say, well, I think maybe they got there by boat. But I just wanted to point out that there are supporters of that idea who are completely secular scientists. So it's not like something that just creationists believe. It's also believed by by
Oh,
secular scientists. My wife's calling me. I'm sorry. I'll be right back.
sorry about that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
No, it's fine.
Sometimes when a family member calls, you just can't get them off the phone. You know, they're going on and on about something. And I was interested. I just really am thinking, you know,
Yep.
can you kind of hurry it up?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think land bridges explain it. In some cases, boats like Easter Island and the Hawaiian Islands. Yeah, I think.
Well, the question I have is this: how would an ice sheet even form after the flood?
Okay, that's something that's not understood by most people. They don't understand how do you merge the, how can you account for the ice age with the Noahic flood?
Hmm.
Okay, I'm going to explain that to you. 1 second.
All right. Because I'd be very interested to hear this, because the only way that I can think of that occurring is by precipitation.
That's part of the process. So, the Bible in the book of Job, Job chapter I think it's 38 says, "The face of the deep is frozen, as like a stone." Now, that's a remarkable statement. Why would the Bible say that? What's it talking about? Job was a Mideastern man. He lived in the Mideast. He never traveled up north. He didn't go up to, we don't have any reason to believe he traveled like, most people in ancient times traveled no more than 20 miles from the place they were born their whole life long. So why would Job be mentioning the face of the deep is frozen if he had never went up to Scandinavia to see it for himself? I think it's because the Bible is the inspired word of God, and that's why it has that statement in there. The face of the deep is frozen as like a stone. So here's what happened when the Earth split open at the where the mid-oceanic ridges, which are at the ocean floor today, and they were actually probably part of loosely fitting continents in the past, or a single continent that was now split apart, and hot water ejected from inside the Earth and came rushing out and initiated the flood of Noah. And so this water would have been hot because it came from deep inside the crust,
Hmm.
10 miles or more down. And it would have been very heavily laden with minerals, which is why we have a fossil record. The waters of the oceans today and the rivers and everywhere, with the exception of a couple of places where you can put a teddy bear and it's encrusted with material over a month or a couple of months' time. For the most part, the waters of the earth don't have the mineral content necessary to make a fossil. Why do you have a fossil record? Well, because the waters that poured out of the earth during the flood of Noah had lots of minerals in them. That's why we have a fossil record. So the water poured out, hot water from within the earth, heavily laden with minerals, and warmed the oceans dramatically, many degrees, perhaps 20, 40, 60 degrees hotter than they were before the flood. Whereas the water ejected from the earth, when the earth cracked open, a column of water at supersonic velocity shot out of the earth, and it had like almost no viscosity, just superfluid. When water moves at supersonic speeds, it becomes superfluid. It has virtually no fluid and no viscosity at all, just like the slickest material possible, like the slickest oil that could ever be, except it's so super thin because it's moving so fast. So you have a super sonic column of water shooting out of the earth at incredible velocity, thousands of feet per second. It goes all the way up into the upper atmosphere. Some of it actually escapes the earth. The majority of it probably does not, and is caught up in the gravity of the earth. Some of it never makes it. As imagine if you put your hand over the hole on a garden hose and turn it on, you're going to have a column of water shoot up. Some of it's going to go higher in the middle. Other parts are going to spray off to the sides and then won't get as high, right? That's what happened as it, just like a fountain coming up. So some of it went all the way, escaped the earth. Some of it went into high orbit around the earth. Some of it never got any farther than the stratosphere. Some of it didn't even get that high. But it goes up into the earth atmosphere, and it's ejecting. Now the continents are moving apart at high rate of speed, up to 40 or 50 miles per hour at one point. With that much force and friction going on in the continents, you have a massive number of tons of material inside the continents being literally ground into a molten state by the friction. Imagine 10 feet of continent being scrubbing across itself as it's moving across the Earth.
Yeah.
The heat and friction that would generate would be astonishing, right? So
Hmm.
it would create a tremendous amount. It would melt a lot of rocks into a magma state and squeeze that molten material to the side near the edges. That's why we have the ring of fire, the volcanoes that go all the way around the continents, Asia and North America and the Pacific. So what would have happened is this would have caused countless volcanoes to burst up out of the earth, even many of them erupt under the waters while the waters are still flooding over the earth, which would account for ash layers in the geologic column. So you've got a massive amount of volcanic activity because of the continents being shoved apart at considerable speed, water ejecting out into high into the atmosphere, and this volcanic activity literally fills the sky with ash, so blocking out the sun. Now the upper atmosphere of the Earth is ice cold. The sun ain't heating nothing because it's dark like night on the Earth because the skies are literally filled with volcanic ash. Now,
All right.
so the atmosphere gets extremely cold. The whole atmosphere, very cold. Noah would have been breathing frost, just stepping out onto the surface of the ark. If he could have during that event, he would have stayed inside, I'm sure. But yeah, had he stepped out, he would have breathed fog like if he was standing in Alaska in the wintertime. It would have gotten really cold outside really quick. And so now you've got massive amounts of water shot up into the air, into the sky, some of it still rolling around the earth because of the gravity of the earth, hanging on, and would come back down on the earth as giant chunks of ice and snow and sleet mostly. And you've got oceans that are way warmer, much warmer than they were before. Really warm ocean waters, but the atmosphere is cold. So you've got all this ocean water that's really warm evaporating like crazy into the sky. It gets up high where it's cold, turns into snow, and the Earth experiences a snowstorm like it's never had before and never will again. So that would explain the snow that would come down in an astonishing snowstorm that would cover the continents in the northern hemisphere with a couple of miles thick of what would become ice. So that's the mechanism that explains the Ice Age, and it happened really fast. It didn't take thousands of years. The really hot oceans, evaporating water like crazy into a super cold atmosphere, created a snowstorm that was just absolutely unbelievable, and that snow came down, forming the ice sheets that covered the continents. That's how the Ice Age took place.
All right. And this is occurring, I presume, at the same time that limestone is forming, right? Or roughly after that, correct?
Well, the flood lasted approximately a year, according to scripture.
Yeah.
And so the mountains of the earth raised out of the seas. The waters didn't go up to the top of Mount Everest. Mount Everest rose up out of the seas. And that's why mountains of the earth have folded strata and deformed strata. It's because they were soft materials recently deposited by the flood. As they're squeezed up out of the earth, and they get squeezed and deformed, accounting for the folded strata in the mountains. And gravity of the earth sucks the water out after it's been uplifted, and it begins to concrete into solid stone.
Okay, all right. So I just have one problem with this, though. So you realize that that's going to create a huge amount of heat, right?
Yes, but the ocean, the ocean acts like a radiator as well. It became much warmer, but it would continuously suck the heat produced by the Noahic flood to itself and disperse it.
Okay, now this is what I'm concerned about, all right? So according to Ari Poldervaart, 1955, Chemistry of the Earth's Crust, page 119 through 144, the total mass of all limestone on Earth is about 5 times 10 to the 23rd grams. Limestone is on average 80% 80% calcite by mass. In other words, on average, there should be about 4 times 10 to the 23rd grams of calcite. Now, the formation of this limestone would release per gram of calcite approximately 2,697.214 calories per grams as per my calculation. Now, if we look at all the water currently on Earth, this includes all the water in the oceans, ice caps, lakes, rivers, groundwater, atmospheric water, and even the water in Noah and all of his tomato plants. It would be 1.386 times 10 to the 24 grams. Now, assuming that every last drop of water covered the surface at the time of Noah's flood, and given that 1 calorie of water it takes 1 calorie of water to 1 gram of water by a degree centigrade, doing a simple calculation by taking the amount of heat that would be released and dividing that by the amount of water, would give us a temperature of approximately 778.4 centigrade. To give you a reference point, gold melts at 1064 centigrade, and this would be the case for all water. This is all the water contained in the earth. This is if you were to shrivel up the planet like a large raisin and extract all the water. That is how much heating there would be.
So let's assume that is right. I don't agree that scientist is correct, but let's assume that's right. Then how?
Well, that's my calculation.
Then how can life have existed on the Earth by uniformitarian standards and account for all the limestone?
Well, because
didn't you just tell me that would kill all life on the Earth?
Well, yes, but here's the thing. That heating would have been dispersed over many millions of years. So according to the young Earth creationist theory, the problem with that is I don't see how ice caps could have even formed, let alone how we could have such a broad amount of marine life.
What you're looking at now is limestone.
Yeah, that would probably be melted in a flood scenario.
The interesting thing is you see the stratification in it.
Yeah.
Okay, it can't have formed over millions of years.
Why?
Because strata can't form over millions of years.
Why not?
Because they clear distinct boundaries between it. You see this? If these materials were deposited over a vast geologic period of time, they would gradiate from one into another. You would not find such fine boundaries between these layers.
Where's the fine boundary? There's gradation just below that where there's contamination. Yeah, I can see them, but I can also see parts of the rock that have contaminated below it. Look at the so-called...
Sure, it's got contaminated other materials mixed in with the limestone, of course.
Yeah, and that's not a clear, hard boundary.
Right, but this is. That is. And this is.
Is it? I see contamination in other layers. This is perfectly what we would expect to see.
No.
Uniformitarianism.
It's not possible for uniformitarianism to create these kind of boundaries. If these materials were being deposited over a vast ages of time, one material would gradiate into another. Boundaries like this are created by moving water. Okay, stratification. Now, let me share with you some information that demonstrates that. Okay, and this is not something I know that people like yourself and a lot of other people believe that that this is just a creationist idea. It's not. I'm going to screen share with you a text file from my own files. Okay. That demonstrates that what I'm saying is not something held to just by creationists. It's held to by secular scientists. Okay.
All right.
So these are some personal files that I have on lamination. Okay. Some laboratory experiments that show strata form rapidly because of moving water and sort material by particle size and grain size. Here's one: Cunin and Maynard, 1952. Kate Switz, 1952, 1956, 1959, 1963, 1962, 1964, 1965, 1975, 1967, 1970, 1971, 1975, 77, 76, 1980, 1984, 1988, 2014, 2012, 2010, 2004, 2007, 2002, 1988, Okay, so the list goes on. All these science papers, these are published in secular journals, and they
Okay.
all describe sediments forming layers, strata, and and sorting materials by particle size and density
Okay.
right before your very eyes. Okay,
And
so
yeah,
it's not a mystery how a strata form. They are formed by moving water. They are not formed over vast geologic time.
well, here's the problem with that, though. That actually contradicts us. For the idea that that would actually happen contradicts Stokes' law. The flood. The problem with the flood is that the only way for the deposition of materials, according to the flood model, due to Baumgartner and Barnett's cyclonic water currents, is actually Darcy flow. There is no other way for that to be the case. There cannot be.
I'm not sure what you're saying there. All I'm pointing out is that even secular geologists,
Well,
sedimentologists, uh, uh, hydrologists acknowledge that sedimentary strata are laid down by moving water and automatically sort particles by grain size
well, that's one
and
method.
density. Okay.
That's one method.
Well, nobody knows of any other method, and
They're the only.
any long deposition method would contradict the very features of the strata themselves, because the geologic column is made up almost exclusively of strata which have clear, distinct boundaries and particle size distribution.
Well, what do you mean clear, distinct boundaries? There's clear
I just
gradation between the
I just
layers.
showed you some.
Well, yeah, and you had gradation into the layers below it by that layer. You had contamination in the other layers.
The point is, there's very little gradation in all of the strata throughout the geologic column. The vast majority of it has a clear, distinct boundary from one to the other.
Yeah, and that's due to different. Excuse me. The clear, distinct boundary is due to the in terms of chalk, right? What you should have been is chalk, right? The reason for why you have those well, actually, no, I don't. Well, yeah, you have that clear, distinct boundary, but that can also. But again, chalk was formed under. All chalk is really formed underwater. So again, I don't. And again, the problem with what you showed me right there is very is very interesting, because here's the thing: with that chalk, those chalk deposits could not have formed during the flood, because again, you have thermodynamics, and then you also have the fact that Darcy flow you would see a huge amount of material being deposited in layers below it due to Darcy flow. There's
Yeah, I just can't. No, I can possibly agree with that.
even
Look at this photograph, if you would. Here's a man walking
yeah,
on top of numerous layers of strata, and you're telling me, I want you to see the layers. When I say clear, distinct boundaries, that's what I'm talking about.
yes,
The layers, the boundaries between these strata are super fine. Okay,
yeah.
that would not happen if this material were deposited over a vast
What?
age of time, because material would gradiate into the next. As one material becomes less available to the environment for deposition
Yeah,
and
and
another
that
becomes more available, they would gradiate over time, one into the next. An event like this indicates that this material was sorted by water and said, you're going to be separately laid down from you because you're a smaller fine, you're a larger grain size, and you're a finer one. This one stays suspended in the water longer than this guy. This stuff settles out
but that
fast, and
superfine
that
boundary
sits above it.
but that superfine boundary is on the order of thousands of years.
Well, in your imagination,
Well,
but
no,
it can't. It doesn't happen in geology.
according to uniformitarianism, according to geology, yeah, those barriers, those superfine barriers, are on the orders of thousands of years.
No, that's
There's
what
no,
they claim. I know, but
yeah,
I'm telling you that the properties of these fine boundaries contradict that. Look here.
that
Why?
cannot.
I'll say it again, because materials are sorted hydrologically automatically by moving water to have these fine grains, to
And
have
that
these
would
fine distribution. This is observed, repeated, demonstrated science. It's
and
been
that would not have
recorded in the journals over and over and over again.
and that would not have occurred until the current stopped because of
Oh,
Stokes' law.
wait. Now,
The
I guess
current would
you're
have
not understanding.
stopped
Let me explain
for
something
that
to
to
you.
have occurred.
Sedimentologists and hydrologists acknowledge sedimentary strata are created by moving water. They're not produced by aeolian processes. They're not produced by still water.
Then
They're
explain
produced by
the
moving
sand waves
water.
in the Coconino. Those are impossible to form under the conditions of Noah's flood.
No, because the trailing edge of them is 15 degrees, not 25 to 35.
Hmm?
And that
And
means they were formed underwater, not in
it's
above land.
those figures are taken from modern sand dunes.
I already
That,
explained it
yeah,
to you. No,
and,
I'm talking about sand dunes, the sand, the
yeah,
graded beds in the Coconino sandstone.
and that's
Right.
the reason why it's 15 degrees is because of the compaction due to gravity. Now, under a flood model, those actually
No.
cannot occur because due to Baumgartner and Barnett, the sand waves cannot form after 4 or 5 meters per second. And Baumgartner and Barnett's computer models predict flood currents at 40 to 80 meters per second. So we wouldn't even see sand waves. And furthermore, that the Baumgartner and Barnett's computer models actually have a problem in that the Coconico grains, even if they were aeolian in nature, would not have fallen out of the current until the very end of the flood, until the waters began to recede and the current stopped. The problem with that is that in order for the sandstone on top of that to have formed, the currents would have had to have occurred for the entire length of the flood. I'm sorry, Nephi, but there's a reason why I reject young Earth creationism. It's because again, I've looked into it, and again, there is no, even the Institute of Creation Research in Answers in Genesis admits that the flood model has a problem with Stokes' law, and unless you can have a mechanism to overcome that. Now, again, this is perfectly explainable by millions of years of deposition. There's time for that to have settled out. But the problem with that is that in Answers in Genesis, there's an article on the discussion on that, and the mechanism that Answers in Genesis gave was Darcy flow, and that's how you had the chalk beds. Now, if you look at the beaches of Dover, those are very pure chalk beds. Those are only possible to have formed under very, very deep water. Now, the problem with that is that the coccolithophores that would have had to have formed that would not be able to engage in massive blooms and currents that are as fast as bullet trains.
All right, so let me respond. Okay, so the Stokes law is a problem. Okay, but the greater problem is you can't get sedimentary strata with long deposition. It will never happen. It's been verified in the laboratory by countless experiments that observed, tested, repeated strata form right before your eyes in real time, one strata up top of the other one by particle size distribution and grain leading edge grain distribution. They form right before your eyes. That's why we have the clear, distinct boundaries between the strata. If the strata were represented materials that had been deposited over a vast age of time, one material would gradiate slowly into the other. They would blend. They would not have these clear, distinct boundaries. So the answer is this. We don't know how Stokes' law is avoided by the problem, but one thing we know is the strata were all laid down rapidly. One strata above does not have any significant geologic age different from the one above it or below it because they form together in bands right before your eyes. That's observed, tested, and repeated over and over and over and over with one experiment and another, one university scientist after another. This is not something that's questionable. The problem for the uniformitarianist is how do you squeeze the millions of years into the strata when they form rapidly by moving water? Well, that's the great question that no uniformitarianist can adequately account for.
That's only one way that they can form. And again, I don't think that we've had millions of years of observation to, again, I don't think that you can discount that from
okay, so if it's only one way in which they can form, can you explain to me how clear, distinct boundaries can be created by deposition that is mind-bendingly slow?
Mind-bendingly slow? Yeah, sure. If you look at these superfine boundaries, you will find different chemical compositions as these materials became more or less filled. Now, Nephi, I'm not claiming that every every formation is a sedimentary formation is aeolian. What I'm claiming, Nephi, is that there are some. No, well, that there are some that are aeolian. Well, I'm just clarifying that. But to argue that it was formed by the flood is to ignore a very basic law of physics. Now, Nephi, again, I'm not
I'm not ignoring it. I'm just saying the solution is unknown. The only thing that we can know for sure is that secular geologists agree strata are formed by moving water, not by still water. That leads to gradation. Still water leads to gradation, with the exception of varves. So they were formed rapidly, okay, by moving water. Now, how the uniformitarianists can squeeze their millions of years in there is unknown. Uniformitarianists can't actually account for it, and that's why you never hear of a uniformitarian geologist even bother to talk about it, because they don't have an answer.
Well, I mean, Nephi, again, I mean, for example, with fluvian deposits, the way for example, shale is deposited in flood basins, in floodplains, and yeah, sure, you can have these distinct boundaries. For example, in shale deposits, when the material eroded, becomes, for example, let's say you would have material eroded off of a sedimentary mountain, all right? And all that, once that material erodes effectively completely, the subsequent materials, so let's say after that you have that sedimentary material that's eroded, you have an igneous formation that would produce your clear distinct boundary in a floodplain as the waters in a fluvian deposit. The fluvian deposit would have been would be transporting materials that have a chemical inconsistency with the previous layers. Now, in a global flood model, you have to show that there are no aeolian deposits. Now, that's impossible because, yeah, and sure, I'll acknowledge that the Coconino has fluvian anomalies in it, but if you look at the sand waves, then no, those cannot have been formed during Noah's flood, and that there isn't a solution to that. There is a physical inconsistency with the laws of physics that would require that one of the most well-known laws of fluid mechanics be suspended entirely for the length of the flood. Now, until I see the evidence, Nephi,
can you explain what is it that you say cannot have formed during the flood?
They cannot have formed during the flood.
What cannot have formed during the flood?
The Coconino and chalk formations.
Well, I explained already the trailing edge of the sand dunes is 15 degrees. You explained this away by compaction, but I don't think that can, because one layer upon the other of these angles indicates they were formed that way and preserved that way, not squeezed into that position. That would require horizontal pressure, and the material would have to be soft. That means it would have to be soft underwater for millions of years. You didn't see you think about what you just said. That compaction can't be it, because compaction, it would not be vertical compaction that would do it. You would have to have horizontal and vertical compaction. On top of that, the materials would have to be soft, not solid stone, for millions of years. So what you're arguing is sand dunes remained underwater, or even if they didn't remain underwater, they remained on land, undestroyed by wind for millions of years, while new ones were built up on top of them. That doesn't make sense.
Well, Nephi, the Coconino was protected from erosion by the formation of layers above it, and the layer above it, if I'm not I forget the name of that. I think it's the Navajo sandstone. I might be misremembering, but the Coconino is sandwiched between two layers, and that provides the horizontal compaction.
Now, you can imagine that away.
The vertical compaction, excuse me.
Yeah, well, you're welcome to believe that answers for it. The physical evidence is simply the angle, and it's present with one on top of the other. Now, I want you to watch this for a second. This is a hydrology experiment right here, and this is what I'm talking to you about. That's been verified over and over and over. Secular scientists acknowledge strata are formed right before your eyes in sleuth experiments, where one material is deposited right on top of the other, and they are sorted automatically by particle size and distribution. Here is such an explanation. Here is a secular sedimentologist from Denmark, from the Netherlands, right there, explaining leading edge grain distribution, particle distribution, and how strata form, and you see it happen right before your eyes. Okay,
Yeah,
this is
but
what happens. Okay,
that
so
only
it's not questionable. Even secular geologists,
yeah.
sedimentologists, and hydrologists acknowledge that is how strata formed. Now, that's not uniformitarianism.
That's one
So,
way that
so
strata can form. One way.
there is no other way.
Yeah, there is Aeolian. Again,
No,
the
because Aeolian. How do you explain strata, sedimentary strata, that are formed with water by Aeolian processes?
What do you mean? Are you trying to say that the Aeolian processes cannot form the coconino?
No, I'm talking about the geologic column as a whole, not just the Coconino. I'm talking about the geologic column. They were created by moving water, not Aeolian processes. By the way, you won't have a fossil if the strata were laid down. Strata don't form by Aeolian processes. A layer might, but not a strata. Strata are created by moving water, and they have
Strata
particle size
are a collection
distribution.
of layers.
Strata have particle size distribution and clear, distinct boundaries. That doesn't happen by Aeolian process.
And yes, it does. The boundaries are perfectly explainable by the erosion of it.
What show us strata on the Earth that could have been formed by Aeolian processes?
Again, the coconino. That must have been formed by Aeolian processes due to these sand waves.
No, the sand waves show the leading a trailing edge
Yeah,
angle of 15 degrees,
and that must have been
25 to
that,
35.
and that must have been compacted from an erg with an angle of 25 to 35.
Well, that's a rescue device for you to say
No,
that
it's
it
not.
must have been.
That's what's recognized by the majority of geologists.
Well, of course, they have a rescue device. They have countless rescue devices. But the problem is, how are you going to get these sand dunes, to remain undestroyed by wind for thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, while new ones are formed on top to get deep enough to compact? And then, do you understand? It would never become sandstone. Sandstone is formed because of mineralized water filling the sand and concreting the grains of sand together like glue. You have to have water, bring the minerals there. Sandstone is not formed by Aeolian processes.
Notice
Sand could be deposited by it, but sandstone requires water with minerals in it to form. Why? Okay, let's look it up.
Okay, yes, because here's the thing. Okay, sandstone can be compacted by gravity.
Okay.
All right, hold on just a moment. Yep.
Okay, here's a wiki article on sandstone. Most sandstone is composed of quartz or felspar, both silicates, because they are, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see here. Rock formation.
All right.
Okay, rock formations are primarily composed of sandstone, usually allow the percolation of water, other fluids, and that's not the explanation for its formation origins. Sandstone are clastic in origin. Let's see here. They are formed from cemented grains that may either be fragments of pre-existing rock or monomineralistic crystals. The cements that binding these grains are typically, and they name the type. And let's see here. The formation of sandstone involves two principles. First, the layers of sand accumulate as a result of sedimentation, either from water or from air.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there
Right.
can be Aeolian.
Okay. So where do the minerals come from?
From the
Water. From
or
water.
air.
Without the water and the minerals, you will not get sandstone. Air. Look, dry sand will never produce stone. You could squeeze it 1 billion years and you take the weight away and it's still sand. You're never going to turn dry sand into stone. You have to have water with minerals to make sandstone.
Again, there's nothing about
so
this.
Here they say, finally, once it has accumulated, the sand becomes sandstone when it is compacted and the pressure of overlying deposits and cemented by the precipitation of minerals within the pores of the grains. So where's this precipitation of minerals get all the way down into the sand so that it becomes solid sandstone? Well, because water, not by air. Start sprinkling minerals on the top of sand that's 300 feet thick. And does it ever get to the bottom? Never. It's going to stay right there on the top. So you're never going to get sandstone formed without mineralized water.
Well, again,
This is a myth. To believe that is just one more atheist myth.
Coconino. The Coconino did not stay dry. If you look at the rain bands on it, the Coconino was not dry during the entire time. And if you look at, for example, there are examples of heavily mineralized rain. So,
okay, so that's a rescue device. Water, nonetheless, was the cause. Okay, and the Coconino sandstone. We've been over this, you and me. It traveled from the Appalachian Mountains area and was deposited in the American Southwest, billions of tons of it. Now, there is no, it's just absurd to believe there was a wind pattern that blew sand from that one place all the way across North America, but was not strong enough to wipe life out on the planet. You can't believe this story. Come on.
Well, Nephi, I've actually looked this up, and the Coconino zircons actually come from 3 different places.
Hey, I gotta go make dinner for my wife. But listen,
yeah,
I'll just end it on this. If you want to believe that a giant wind existed for a million years or something,
doesn't need to. There could have been
or 1,000 years, or a week.
There could have been a primordial river that might have helped it along. That certainly.
So water brought it there.
No, not entirely. Not entirely.
Water brought it there. The water would have to have brought it there, because for there to have been a wind current so steady that it maintained that course, for that to transport sand from the Appalachian Mountains area all the way to the Southwest and deposit millions of tons of it, and just so happened it didn't deposit it all along the way. By the way, we don't see this road of sandstone going between the Coconino and Appalachian Mountains.
Only about 34%,
which we should. It would be a catastrophic event vastly greater than the flood of Noah. That would destroy life on this planet.
Only about 34% of the Coconino are reported to be of Appalachian origin.
And you can't get a fossil with alien processes. You could get a mummy, but you're not going to get a fossil. So fossils found in the Coconino sandstone refute the alien cause of their formation.
Well, I don't agree, because you have the fossils of insect prints that would have been destroyed. Like, for example, let's say you go up to if you stick your foot in the sand there, that the wave, any sort of wave or current would.
I'm not talking about imprint fossils.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about imprint fossils.
All right.
Okay. So a fossil in sandstone, you're not going to have any creature there become fossilized, because it would become mummified. It would just simply dry out and crumble. Okay. To be preserved, it has to be deposited in a water environment. So water brings the minerals necessarily to turn its tissues into stone. You could get a mummy in the sand. You won't get
and if that mummy is buried and compacted, then the sandstone over time will replace it.
And it crumbles. It turns into dust over a period of 20,000 years. Not
if it's heavily compacted. No.
Well, if it's heavily compacted and it's dry as a bone, it's going to turn to dust when it's squeezed.
No, if it's done.
Look, I have to go. It's been fun talking to you. I enjoyed debating with you. Let's do it again sometime. But my wife is calling me, and she's got to eat, and I've got to take her to the house in the morning and stuff. So got to go. But I appreciate you talking to me. I've enjoyed debating with you, and I enjoyed the friendly neighbor way in which we've done it, and I'd like to do it again sometime.
Hey, Nephi. Do you mind debating theology with me next time?
I'd love to debate theology.
Yeah.
Sure. Sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate debating with you.
Okay. Thanks for coming. And we'll set it up again sometime in the next couple of weeks. Maybe we can debate theology if you like. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I hate to run, but I do have to. We've been.
I have to run as well. I have things to do at 5 and 6, and I have to get going right now. I have to dry clean and everything.
Oh, okay. Yep. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and that concludes this discussion. Talk to you soon. We'll be in touch in Skype.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. See ya. Bye.
Thanks.